Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, swinging your legs out of bed and, just walking into the bathroom. You flip on that harsh overhead light, look into the mirror above the sink, and the brain's map of your own body, like the fundamental neurological blueprint you have relied on since you were a toddler, it suddenly completely contradicts the visual input hitting your retinas.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is the stuff of actual nightmares.
Right. And neurologists actually have a term for this kind of disconnect. It's things like somatoparaphrenia, where a person firmly believes their own arm belongs to someone else.
Wow. Yeah, it is a terrifying, foundation-shattering break from reality.
Exactly. Because when your external physical form no longer matches your internal identity, the psychological immune system basically starts attacking itself. You don't just question your eyesight, you question your sanity, your history, and literally your right to exist. And that exact terrifying disconnect is the threshold we are crossing today.
I love that setup.
Welcome to today's custom deep dive. We have an absolutely fascinating stack of sources in front of us today, zeroing in on a masterful book titled A Collection of 18 Short Stories, a blend of fact and fantasy by Lawrence G. Taylor.
It really is a remarkable piece of literature. I mean, what Taylor has done here is he's basically built a literary Russian nesting doll.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because it's flash fiction, layered over poetry, which is layered over raw, unfiltered memoir. And he manages to compress these monumental existential questions into these incredibly brief, potent flashes of storytelling.
And the mission for you, the listener, as we navigate this collection today, is to explore exactly how this 84-year-old author uses these 18 distinct pieces to capture the absolute chaotic, unpredictable energy of modern human life.
Right, and there is a lot of chaos in there.
So much chaos. We are going to dissect the brutal sting of unrequited love, the very dark, sometimes surreal humor of aging, and, ultimately we're going to decode the incredibly blurry line between Taylor's actual lived reality, a life that spans across British Guiana, London, and Sweden, and the fantastical, desperate worlds his characters inhabit.
It's quite a journey.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this, because Taylor doesn't just write stories. He writes psychological traps.
He really does. And your opening point about the mirror is the exact right place to start, actually, because the overarching psychological baseline for so many of these 18 stories is the violent collision between how individuals perceive themselves internally and how society categorizes them externally.
Yeah.
It is a deep exploration of the absurdity of identity and the heavy, often crushing weight of being labeled as the other.
Which brings us to a story that reads like a modern horror film, The Morning I Became Nobody.
Oh, this one is heavy.
It really is. We are introduced to a man named Emeka Agbara. Emeka is a 45-year-old Nigerian refugee. He is a proud Igbo man living with his wife Ngozi and their 6 children in a NATO country. He works as a temporary hospital porter.
Right, just an ordinary guy trying to make ends meet.
Exactly. But then he wakes up one morning, walks to that proverbial mirror, and discovers his skin has turned completely white. He is a black African man who has physically, biologically mutated into a white man overnight.
The scene is written with this Kafkaesque dread, but it plays out in ordinary, bright daylight. I mean, he literally puts on his spectacles, rubs the glass, squints, hoping it's just a trick of the morning light.
Yeah, you can feel his panic.
But the pigmentation remains. The melanin is just gone, and his immediate reaction is not like scientific curiosity. It is a primal, panic-stricken terror.
And it isolates him instantly. His family happens to be away visiting relatives. So he picks up the phone and calls his wife, Ngozi. He tries to explain to her that his black skin has vanished, and Ngozi's reaction is sheer terror. She literally thinks the devil has possessed her husband. She just cannot compute it.
Which leaves him entirely alone.
Right. So Emeka is left alone in his house, pacing, trying to rationalize the impossible. He starts wondering if it was a bad batch of vitamins he bought online. But underneath that desperate rationalization is a much darker, systemic dread. He has an upcoming, highly critical meeting with the immigration office regarding his temporary employment status.
Yeah, and this is the exact moment where the harsh socio-political reality of the world crashes violently into the surreal, supernatural fantasy of the premise. The text explicitly outlines Emeka's acute, paralyzing fear of deportation.
Right, the rumors.
Exactly. It notes a pervasive rumor in his community that political refugees might no longer be excluded from deportation orders, specifically because of the expected victory of a far-right party in the upcoming elections.
Now, I want to pause us right here for just a second. We need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener.
Absolutely.
In discussing this specific plot point about the elections and deportation, we are strictly and impartially reporting Emika's internal fears and the political context exactly as Lawrence G. Taylor wrote them in the source material.
Right, we're just looking at the text.
Exactly. We are not taking any political sides here, nor are we endorsing or condemning any specific political viewpoints. We are simply examining the psychological reality of this fictional character and the pressures he is facing within the narrative.
Exactly. Our job is to examine the narrative machinery. And within that machinery, Emika's political and social fear is the engine driving his psychological collapse. Because his internal monologue becomes deeply, almost tragically conflicted. On one hand, his survival instinct kicks in. He looks at his new white skin and wonders if it might grant him, quote-unquote, utility in this society.
Utility, that is such a cold word.
It really is. He desperately thinks that maybe, just maybe, this white skin will save him from deportation, and he tells himself he will use any advantage to keep his family safe. But on the exact same token, he is paralyzed by the fear that the immigration officers will look at him, see his records, and accuse him of performing black magic or tampering with illegal skin bleaching creams to fraudulently pass as a white man.
He feels like a fraud in his own body. He actually experiences this immense wave of guilt, almost as if his own subconscious betrayed him. Because the text reveals that years ago, Emika casually, almost fleetingly, dreamt of being light-skinned enough to pass as a South African colored person, just to flourish better economically.
Yeah, just an idle thought from a desperate time.
Right. And now the universe has handed him this twisted monkey's paw version of that wish.
And this is where Taylor elevates the story from a simple Twilight Zone premise into a profound philosophical thesis. The text specifically references Jean-Paul Sartre's existential play, No Exit.
Okay, break that down for us, because Sartre can get dense.
Yeah.
How does No Exit explain a man turning white and losing his mind?
Well, it comes down to Sartre's concept of the gaze. Sartre argued that our sense of self isn't actually built in a vacuum. It is inextricably constructed through the perceptions of others.
Okay, so, like, we need a mirror to know who we are.
Exactly. When you are alone, you are the protagonist of your universe. But the moment someone else looks at you, the moment you are subjected to the gaze, you realize you are an object in their universe. You are reduced to whatever labels they apply to you.
Wow.
Yeah. So Emika cannot reconcile his internal, historically rich, proud African identity with this new external utility to a white society. He is entirely trapped in the gaze of the immigration officers before he even steps foot in their office.
Let me push back on that, or at least play devil's advocate here. If Sartre says we are constructed by others' perceptions, and Emika is now perceived as white, shouldn't his internal identity just adapt to the new privilege? Why does it break his brain instead of just making his life easier?
Because the adaptation requires the death of his authentic self. Emika's history, his culture, his ancestors, they don't vanish just because his melanin did. The cognitive dissonance is what breaks him.
I see.
He is being asked by the universe to step into a societal role that completely erases his lived experience. It's an identity autoimmune response. His mind rejects the new societal armor because the armor is suffocating the man inside.
And we see that suffocation play out literally. I mean, the pressure cooker explodes. Emika doesn't just get a little stressed. He has a complete catastrophic nervous breakdown. He calls in and takes 2 weeks of sick leave. Then he takes another 2 weeks. He becomes a total recluse.
And then the dam breaks.
Yeah. He strips off all his clothes and runs naked into the streets during a torrential downpour. He is trying to wash off a skin that isn't his. The police eventually find him shivering on a park bench on the outskirts of the city, completely unresponsive, and he is escorted to a psychiatric emergency ward.
It's such a bleak ending.
It really is. The story ends on this incredibly haunting note, leaving the destiny of Emika's family completely suspended between these two irreconcilable identities.
It is a devastating portrait of how fragile the human mind is when the external world abruptly changes the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
But what is so brilliant about this collection is that Taylor doesn't just explore identity through involuntary physical transformations. He also examines how we voluntarily destroy our own identities through the choices we make and the histories we try to outrun.
Yes, exactly.
We see this vividly in another story, A Bad Apple. We are our own devices.
Let's look at this one, because we shift gears from a modern NATO country back in time to 1960s London, specifically Earl's Court Road. Our narrator, who originally hails from British Guiana, runs into a former schoolmate named Lamont. Now, the context here is absolutely crucial.
Right, the background dynamic.
Back home in Guyana, the narrator considered himself an absolute dunce. He was slow in class, he lacked concentration, he was the class clown. Lamont, conversely, was the undisputed golden boy. He was a brilliant, sharp pupil who was sent off to the UK early to study law and make something of himself.
But when these two men cross paths on this dreary, cloudy, quintessentially gray London day, the dynamic has completely inverted. Lamont is physically restless. He is hurried. His eyes are constantly darting around, looking over his shoulder.
Acting super sketchy.
Yeah, very sketchy. He casually, almost defensively, mentions that he dropped out of law school to study aeronautics, but he's taking a break from that too. The reality, which the narrator soon pieces together, is that Lamont has actually devolved into a petty criminal operating in the London underworld.
Meanwhile, the self-proclaimed dunce, the narrator, is actually thriving. He is embarking on his first year at university studying English literature. He has found his intellectual footing, and when the narrator gently probes Lamont about these erratic life choices, Lamont gets incredibly defensive, snaps at him, and rushes off into the London fog.
It's a brief encounter, but the fallout is tragic.
Yeah, later the narrator learns from a mutual friend named Jerry that Lamont was caught, convicted, and unceremoniously deported back to Guyana, returning as a completely broken man.
Jerry, the mutual friend, offers this very poignant diagnosis. He describes Lamont as a perturbed soul, observing that leaving his home country clearly didn't serve him well at all.
So I want to bring in an analogy here to see if it tracks with what Taylor is doing. We have Imitia, who had his exterior changed by force, and we have Lamont, who tried to change his interior life by moving to a new country and switching from law to crime. To me, Lamont's strategy feels like trying to fix a completely corrupted computer hard drive by just buying a new, expensive monitor.
Oh, that's a fantastic comparison.
You can change the screen, you can change the country, you can change the career, but the operating system is still deeply infected. As soon as you boot it up, it's going to crash. Does changing your geography ever actually fix existential dread?
That is a much more accurate way to look at it than assuming a simple change of scenery cures trauma. Your hard drive analogy perfectly mirrors the philosophical underpinning Taylor uses in this specific story. In the text, the narrator mentions sitting in his room watching a television documentary about the French philosopher Albert Camus, specifically focusing on Camus's concept of absurdity.
Camus is the guy who wrote about Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, right?
Exactly, the myth of Sisyphus. The core tenet of Camus' philosophy of the absurd is that the universe is fundamentally irrational and meaningless, and the only way to live authentically is to accept that life is entirely our own responsibility.
So no one is coming to save you.
Right. We cannot look to the universe, to a new country, or to a new career to provide our meaning. We have to generate it ourselves while pushing our own boulders. If we connect this to Lamont, Taylor's showing us a character who desperately tried to escape his own internal void by changing his external coordinates. He thought London would fix him. He thought law school would fix him. But the corrupted hard drive traveled with him.
Which echoes exactly what Jerry says later in the text. Our life is always our responsibility. Not life, not others. Lamont tried to outrun his own shadow, and the effort literally cost him his freedom. Emika's physical self changed, but it couldn't rewrite his internal truth. Both men tried to navigate the absurd, and both men were crushed by it.
Precisely. They are suffering from a profound foundational alienation. And this theme of alienation, of trying to plug a leaking internal void with some kind of external validation, well, it transitions us into a completely different, but arguably more insidious arena in Taylor's collection.
Yeah, things get a lot more modern.
We move from the physical, geographical alienation of the 1960s straight into the cold, glowing screens of the modern digital ocean.
The digital ocean. This might be the most uncomfortable mirror Taylor holds up in the entire book. He takes these incredibly heavy, dense themes of isolation and thrusts them right into the blinking chat windows of the 21st century.
It hits very close to home.
In a cluster of stories, specifically Diary of an Oldie Geezer, Young Mother and Son, and Reflections on a Distant Relationship, we were introduced to a recurring archetype. The older, lonely male character navigating the murky, predatory waters of online dating and digital romance.
These are men who have aged out of their prime physical social circles. They're largely homebound, seeking connection in an absolute digital void. And unsurprisingly, they are getting mercilessly, systematically scammed.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. Taylor lays out the mechanics of these scams with surgical precision. The names of the women change: Jasmine, Melissa, Anna, Betty, but the underlying script they use is identical.
It is a total playbook. The avatars are always of strikingly beautiful, much younger women. The initial messages are incredibly sweet, flattering, deeply attentive. They build the emotional dependency, And then, inevitably, comes the manufactured crisis.
It always starts small. My phone screen is broken, sweetie. I just need $50 to fix it so I can keep WhatsApping you.
Right, just a tiny favor.
Then it escalates. I need a flight ticket so I can fly out and take care of you in your old age. In one particularly brazen example, a woman claims she has a bleeding ulcer and needs emergency cash for food and stomach medication, or she will literally starve to death while chatting with him.
It is the absolute, ruthless commodification of intimacy. Everything has a price tag attached to a sweetheart emoji. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly kind of heartbreaking. The older men.
They know.
Yeah, that's the wild part.
They aren't stupid. In Diary of an Ole Geezer, the narrator is sitting alone in his apartment in Stockholm at 2 in the morning. The only light in the room is the blue glow of his laptop screen. He freely admits in his internal monologue that he knows these are organized scams. He even has a sense of humor about it, joking that his attempts at digital flirting are less romantic poetry and more Monty Python.
He literally tests them. When one of his scammers starts calling him Sweetie Pie and brazenly asks him to buy her a PlayStation or an Apple Watch, he fires back and tells her he can't, because he's currently saving up his pension for a new set of dentures. That is hilarious.
And immediately she blocks him. The illusion vanishes the second the wallet closes.
But the narrator doesn't log off. He just opens another chat. He actually compares himself to the old fisherman Santiago from Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. He says, if Hemingway's old man had his sea, I have my chat platforms.
That is such a powerful image.
I mean, let's unpack that. He envisions Hemingway's old man sitting right there next to him at 2 a.m., squinting at the glowing screen, reciting that famous line, a man can be destroyed but not defeated. The narrator knows the water is full of sharks. He knows they're going to strip his catch to the bone. But he just keeps casting his line into the dark anyway. Why? Why willingly swim with sharks?
Because the alternative is admitting you are entirely alone in an empty apartment. Taylor uses another brilliant literary reference to explain this exact psychological state. He references Colin Wilson's seminal 1956 book, The Outsider. Wilson explored the psychology of the socially alienated individual. The text suggests that for these older men, being an outsider isn't just about being alienated from the youth-obsessed culture outside their window. It's about feeling like you are standing on the outside of your own life, watching the clock run out. Every time a chat box pings with a hi, it is a test of existence.
It's transactional intimacy, right?
Yeah.
The men are throwing $50 bills into the void just to purchase a temporary flicker of feeling alive, of feeling desired, even if they know it's a mirage.
Exactly.
And on the other side of the screen, the scammers are just trying to hustle a living, maybe pay their own rent in a different country. The narrator summarizes it perfectly. The generational gap yawns wide across the screen. I am chasing connection while they chase Bitcoin.
But Taylor doesn't let the reader get comfortable with just the low-stakes $50 hustles. He takes this concept of willing complicity in a scam and pushes it to its absolute devastating extreme in the story Killing Cracker Softly.
Oh man, Cracker. This story's a tough read.
It really breaks your heart.
We meet a character named Stan, who goes by the nickname Cracker. He is an aging Caribbean immigrant who has built a seemingly successful life in London's East End. He owns a stately townhouse. He has 3 grown sons who genuinely love and respect him. He is not financially destitute, but as the years pile on, his body starts to ache, the house feels too big and too quiet, the profound loneliness creeps in, and he starts wandering down to the local casino just to be around the noise and the lights.
And a casino is an ecosystem designed to prey on vulnerability. It is here that fate, or more accurately, a highly coordinated group of Eastern European scammers, locks onto Cracker.
They see him coming a mile away.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they don't use the standard broken phone script. They tailor a completely absurd, grandiose fantasy specifically for him. They impersonate 3 massive, real-world WWE female wrestling stars: Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley, and Charlotte Flair.
I remember reading this and literally yelling at the pages. The premise is so ridiculous. The scammers convince this elderly man in London that they, these multi-millionaire American wrestling superstars, have had their championship title rewards unfairly frozen by corrupt WWE officials.
It's like a bad movie plot.
Right. And they tell Cracker that if he, and only he, can quietly invest his money to help unfreeze their accounts, they will reward him with riches beyond his wildest dreams and maybe even a life with them.
From a purely logical standpoint, it is a cartoonishly transparent trap. Why would international celebrities need a retired man in the East End to bail them out of a corporate dispute? Yet Cracker falls for it completely. He drains his resources, he hands over his money, and when the inevitable happens, when the scammers vanish into the ether, he isn't just broke, his spirit is entirely shattered.
This is devastating.
We see a very similar mechanism in another reflection titled Taking a Chance, where the narrator himself gambles on a shady book promotion scheme run by a supposed billionaire named Vincent.
Yeah, that one he knows better. He admits it goes against his better judgment. But he is egged on by a friend, a celebrity wrestler no less, and he pours money into this promotional scheme, only to realize that Vincent is a phantom and the promises of literary fame and riches are total smoke. So let me stop and ask you, because I was struggling with this. Are these men just greedy? Are they just letting their greed override their common sense?
This raises an important question, and it's one Taylor answers very carefully in the text. If we look at the clinical psychology of loneliness Taylor is portraying, it actually has almost nothing to do with financial greed.
Wait, really? But Cracker's throwing thousands of pounds at these fake wrestlers to get rich.
He is throwing the money, yes, but look at the internal dialogue during the transaction. In killing Cracker softly, as Cracker is preparing to hand over funds, the text explicitly notes, in that moment, he longed not just for wealth, but for redemption, or perhaps forgiveness for all that had gone before.
Oh, wow.
Cracker does not want to buy a yacht or a sports car. He is buying a time machine. He is funding a fantasy where he gets to play the hero, the savior of these powerful women.
That is profound. So he is essentially purchasing significance. He is buying a ticket to be the protagonist one last time before the clock runs out.
Exactly. When the fantasy shatters, the loss of the money is secondary. The true devastation is the sudden, cold realization of his own utter isolation. He realizes he was never a hero. He was just a mark.
That is brutal. So we've seen how these men will willingly bankrupt themselves for the illusion of connection. But Taylor then pivots and explores what happens when the connection isn't a scam. What happens when a delusion of love is pointed at a real physical person standing right in front of you. Because as Taylor shows us, real love can sometimes fail just as spectacularly as a digital scam.
This brings us to the profound conflict between reason and emotion, which Taylor explores in arguably the most intellectually dense section of the book. The digital scams were purely transactional, but here we are looking at the raw, messy reality of human incompatibility.
And the prime example of this is the story, this thing called love. We are transported to the university city of Lund, Sweden, right in the heart of the make love, not war cultural era. We have two characters, Binky and Linda. Now, they have a history. They had been good friends back in London. They went to museums together, drank in jazz pubs, and shared a very playful, intellectually stimulating dynamic.
A very solid foundation.
But now, Binky has traveled to Sweden to visit Linda. And over the course of the journey, he has allowed this massive, idealized, romantic fantasy to metastasize in his head. He's decided they are destined for a profound romantic love affair.
But Linda is operating on an entirely different wavelength. She is applying cold, hard, instinctual reason. She knows inherently that romantic love cannot be legislated or forced into existence just because it makes logical sense on paper.
All right.
She enjoyed his company as a platonic friend in London, and she views him exactly the same way here in Sweden.
The tension in this story is excruciating. They are riding bicycles through this beautiful, endless Swedish summer evening, and Binky is literally trying to argue his way into her heart like a lawyer presenting a case to a jury. He starts quoting the author D.H. Lawrence at her, insisting that genuine love doesn't come through conscious decision-making. He actually has the audacity to accuse Linda of deliberately willing herself not to love him, as if she is just being stubborn.
Which is the ultimate irony, because Binky is the one trying to impose his will onto reality. He is using romantic literature to try and override Linda's autonomy.
It's like watching two people sit down to play a board game, but they both brought completely different rule books. Binky is slamming down cards based on the rules of 19th century romantic poetry and raw, unbridled emotion. Linda is playing by the rules of practicality, boundary setting, and gut instinct.
And her instinct is spot on.
As he rants and quotes poetry, she realizes her initial hesitation was entirely justified. Binky is incredibly immature. He isn't a tragic, romantic hero. He is just a confused, slightly entitled young man throwing a philosophical temper tantrum.
And what makes Taylor's writing so sophisticated here is that he doesn't paint either of them as a cartoon villain. Binky isn't evil, he is just desperately misguided. Linda isn't cruel, she's just honest. The story refuses to give us a clean, cinematic resolution. It simply trails off into a shared, overwhelmingly awkward dinner back at her apartment, a dinner that Linda clearly doesn't even want to be cooking.
The unrequited love just hangs in the air, spoiling the food. And we see another, even more jarring angle of this reason versus emotion debate in the story. Forever, as in maybe.
Yes, in this piece, we meet a highly competent, pragmatic nurse leader in Sweden. She's the breadwinner, and she is in a relationship with a younger medical student, a dynamic referred to in Swedish culture as a sambo, a live-in partner. On paper, it is a perfectly balanced, entirely logical arrangement.
Makes total sense.
She provides financial and domestic stability. He focuses entirely on his medical studies. It is a relationship built on pure reason and utility.
Until it violently isn't. The narrator of the story bumps into a former colleague of the nurse on a train much later and gets the gossip. It turns out the younger medical student finished his studies and promptly left the nurse for someone else. The logical arrangement collapsed.
It usually does.
But the real whiplash is what happens to the highly competent, hyper-rational nurse leader. She didn't rebound with another logical partnership. She ended up falling into the arms of a new boyfriend who was described as a domineering religious fanatic.
She swings from one extreme of the pendulum entirely to the other. She goes from a relationship of pure, sterile logic to a relationship built on dogmatic, irrational submission.
I have to ask you, what is Taylor trying to tell us about the mechanics of love here? Because it seems like everyone loses.
To understand the mechanics, we have to look at a brilliant metafictional Easter egg Taylor includes in the text. He notes that he actually wrote a philosophical reflection on the nature of love back in Stockholm in 1970. He took this physical piece of paper and tucked it inside a book he was reading at the time, written by the philosopher Maurice Friedman, titled To Deny Our Nothingness.
To Deny Our Nothingness. That is a heavy title.
It is the skeleton key to the entire collection. Friedman's premise and Taylor's application of it is that in a chaotic, absurd universe, humans are terrified of their own insignificance. So we construct images and narratives powerful enough to deny our nothingness. Love is the most potent of these narratives.
Oh, I see.
If we look at the physical note Taylor tucked in that book, it explores why both pure reason and pure emotion fail these characters. If you let the heart completely off the leash, if you rely entirely on emotion like Binky or Cracker, it leads to disaster, delusion, and bankruptcy. You project fantasies onto people who cannot fulfill them.
Right, that makes sense.
But if you rely solely on cold, calculated reason, like the nurse with her medical student, it causes its own brand of sudden, catastrophic unhappiness because humans are not algorithms. We are not purely rational creatures. When the logical structure breaks, the suppressed emotions rebound violently, driving the nurse into the arms of a fanatic.
You cannot outthink the human heart, but you also cannot blindly trust it to steer the ship. You have to find a way to navigate both. And we see how that desperate need to deny our nothingness gets weaponized when love and religion intersect in the story, the reality behind fantasy.
Yes, this is a masterclass in emotional manipulation. We have a text message exchange between Willie, an older, deeply lonely man, and a woman named Harriet. Harriet is a predator, but she is a highly intelligent one. She has accurately mapped Will's psychological terrain. She knows exactly how to manipulate him, and she uses his own religious faith as the lever.
She literally texts him scripture. She quotes the Bible to him. Ask, and it shall be given you, to spiritually guilt him into sending her money. It is so insidious.
She knows that Willie's faith is simultaneously his greatest shield and his softest underbelly. She calculates that he won't be able to refuse a request framed as a divine test of charity. And the tragic part is that Willie isn't entirely blind. He feels that flicker of cognitive dissonance. He suspects he's being played. But he wants to believe the affection is real. He wants the fantasy of being a generous, loved provider more than he wants the security of his bank account.
Which ties perfectly back to Friedman's book. Willie's fantasy isn't just a random escape from boredom. It is a carefully constructed fortress against his demons. Conflict of dying alone.
Exactly. And this inevitability of the end is where Taylor takes us next. When the digital connections turn out to be scams, when the romantic pursuits end in awkward dinners, when the logical partnerships dissolve, Taylor's characters are left with absolutely nothing but the relentless, uncompromising passing of time. They are forced into a reckoning with nostalgia, aging, and the decay of their own minds.
Yes, and the character who embodies this brutal reckoning most vividly is Perry from the story The Legacy. Let me tell you, Perry is an unforgettable literary creation. He is a Caribbean con man operating across London and Trinidad, and he doesn't hide in the shadows. He's flamboyant. He wears these incredible wide-brimmed hats in loud, unusual colors, sharply tailored silk shirts, polished leather shoes. He walks into a room, and the room stops to look at him.
He demands attention.
He is a raconteur, spinning these grand, captivating stories of his complex schemes, his boutique businesses, his daring near misses with the authorities.
He is a man who exists entirely within his own performance. He proudly states that his primary targets are the quiet men, the men who think they can stay invisible and safe. Perry preys on their predictable routines. But the tragic irony of this story is that eventually, the ultimate quiet man, time itself, targets Perry.
Time totally disrespects a performance. Perry begins to develop dementia. And Taylor describes this not as a sudden drop, but as a slow, agonizing erosion. Perry's in the middle of spinning one of his legendary stories, and suddenly he loses the thread. He reaches into his brain for a name, a place, a punchline, and his fingers close around empty air. There is just a blank space. The cognitive machinery is failing.
And as the mind goes, the wardrobe follows. He sheds the flamboyant silk shirts and the wide-brimmed hats. The con man vanishes, and what is left behind is a frail, born-again Christian, sitting quietly in a chair, being cared for by twin daughters he barely even knew he had during his wild years.
There was this one scene that just gutted me. His daughters are sitting with him, reading scripture aloud to try and comfort him. They read the famous line about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And Perry, stripped of all his bravado, all his schemes, looks up, nods slowly, and whispers, "Yes, I know that valley."
It strips away every ounce of artifice. Dementia doesn't care how sharp your suits were. And Taylor brilliantly contrasts Perry's involuntary physical and cognitive decline with the intense, conscious mental and spiritual wrestling of another character, Cyril, in the story The Last Door.
Cyril's story is so quiet, but so incredibly tense. Cyril is 82 years old. He is sitting in his favorite armchair listening to the radio. And a science broadcast comes on. The presenter is matter-of-factly discussing the nature of human consciousness and boldly states that from a scientific perspective, there is no afterlife. The concept of a soul departing the body and dissolving into light is dismissed as a biological impossibility, a fairy tale we tell ourselves to cope with finality.
Now, for a young university student, this might just be an interesting late-night dorm room debate. But for an 82-year-old man nearing the end of his timeline, this broadcast is a devastating existential blow. Because Cyril's entire psychological framework is built on a specific anticipation. He has been holding on to the memory of his mother, who died at the tragic age of 29, when Cyril was merely 2 years old.
He has lived 80 years without her. He's been waiting his entire life for the promised reunion. And now the radio is casually telling him that the waiting room is empty, the reunion is canceled. But Cyril is defiant. He sits in his chair and outright refuses to accept the broadcast. He stubbornly declares that he is not going to switch off his lifelong faith on the dismissive word of some radio program.
Because if he accepts the science, he loses his mother all over again. Cyril's entire existence is anchored by these deep, persistent memories, both beautiful and deeply traumatic. He holds fiercely onto the midnight dreams where he can almost feel his mother's presence. But conversely, he is also chained to the traumas of his youth.
The spilling incident.
Exactly. Even at 82, he carries the sharp, agonizingly vivid humiliation of his father, forcing him to stand in front of his aunts and spell the word trousers. He misspelled it, the adults mocked him, and that single moment of shame triggered a lifelong stutter and a permanent internal sense of self-betrayal.
So what does this all actually mean for us? Why dedicate these stories to an old man's dementia and another old man's childhood spelling mistake? I think Taylor is forcing us to confront a terrifying reality. At the very end of the line, memory becomes the absolute only possession you have left. Your bank account doesn't matter. Your physical vitality is long gone. Your clever schemes have run their course. All you actually own in the dark is the memory of a summer sun, the phantom warmth of a mother you barely knew, or the sharp sting of spelling a word wrong 80 years ago. Memory is the final currency.
That is a beautiful way to phrase it. And Taylor visualizes this slipping away of time and the bizarre nature of memory in a wonderfully surreal, almost cinematic way in two interconnected stories, Gate-Crashing Lady's Dinner Party and Reminiscence of a Bygone Summer.
This sequence is wild. It operates on pure dream logic. The narrator and his old mates from Queens College decide they want to relive their youth. They want to gate crash a reunion of the Coven High School girls. The exact same girls they used to chase and flirt with decades ago. But to get in, they devise this absurd plan to disguise themselves as Catholic priests.
They are desperately chasing the ghosts of their youth. They want to walk into that room and see the vibrant young girls they remember from the summer of yesteryear.
But the reality of time hits them like a freight train. When they finally sneak inside, they look around the room and are completely horrified to discover that the girls are no longer girls, they are elderly women. The men cruelly refer to them as old birds, and the men become instantly deeply despondent, not just because the women have aged, but because the men still feel like teenagers in their own minds.
It's that cognitive dissonance again.
The delusion is shattered when one of the elderly women squints, recognizes the narrator through his priest disguise, and yells out, "What happened to you? You haven't changed." The narrator feels completely exposed. He feels like a cretin.
And this is where the dream logic fully takes over, elevating the story into magical realism. The cops arrive to bust the gatecrashers. The old men panic, run to an open window, and literally leap out. But instead of falling to the pavement, they fly away like Superman into the night sky, soaring over the city, only to be suddenly hit with the childish, mundane panic that they are going to be late for school.
It is brilliant. Old men with bad joints flying through the sky, worrying about the school bell. We connect this to the bigger picture. Taylor is showing us that the experience of aging isn't just one note. It is this bizarre, contradictory mix of deep, paralyzing existential dread, like Cyril facing the scientific void, an absurd, almost slapstick comedy, like old men in priest costumes flying out of windows to escape the reality of their own wrinkles.
He perfectly captures that universal human phenomenon. The feeling that inside our heads we are all permanently paused at 18 or 25 years old, perpetually shocked and slightly offended when we walk past a mirror and realize our bodies somehow turned 84.
And speaking of turning 84, this brings us to the final and, frankly, the most impactful revelation of this entire deep dive. We have spent the last hour exploring these fantastical, often tragic, sometimes surreal fictions. We have analyzed Anika's skin, Lamont's crimes, Binky's unrequited love, and Perry's dementia. But now, Taylor executes his masterstroke. He pulls the curtain completely back to reveal the structural foundation of the entire book in two autobiographical pieces, Serendipities Across Nations and A Sense of Time.
Yes. The fictions fall away. Taylor strips the narrative down to the absolute bone and writes purely, analytically, about his own lived reality at age 84. And he poses the central, unifying question of not just the book, but his entire existence. Are the events of a human life the product of pure, blind chance, or are they the result of human resolve and agency? Or is it some chaotic alchemy of both?
When you look at his actual life, it reads like a Dickens novel mixed with a modern travelogue. He was born in British Guiana, a colonial country. And as a young boy in the school system, he was quickly labeled slow and lazy by his teachers. They completely wrote him off, failing to understand that he wasn't slow. His brain was just absorbing and processing the world differently than the rigid curriculum demanded. But human resolve kicks in. By the time he's 18, the boy they call the dunce is working at a daily newspaper, operating a linotype machine.
And we should pause to explain what a linotype machine is, because the metaphor is too rich to ignore. A linotype machine is this massive, incredibly complex, loud, dangerous piece of industrial machinery used in old newspaper publishing. It literally casts blocks of type out of boiling, molten lead. The operator types on a keyboard, and the machine physically forges the words into hot metal.
That is incredible. So as a teenager, he is literally forging words into solid, heavy reality. Think about the contrast. He spends his youth setting words in molten lead, and he spends his old age writing stories about men chasing fleeting, weightless words in digital chat windows.
Exactly. But then, at age 20, the trajectory shifts. He leaves Guyana and moves to London. He has no grand master plan. He secures a grueling job in industrial radiography. And this is the precise moment where the invisible hand of chance enters the narrative and completely rewrites his destiny. He goes in for a routine medical examination, and a blood test reveals he is infected with microfilaria.
Wait, microfilaria, what exactly is that?
Microfilaria are microscopic parasitic worms. They are transmitted by mosquito bites in tropical climates like Guyana, and they migrate through the human bloodstream and lymphatic system. It is a serious tropical disease that requires specialized treatment. Because of this microscopic parasite swimming in his blood, Taylor is admitted as a patient to the Tropical Disease Hospital in London.
And it is in that specific hospital bed, suffering from a tropical parasite he unknowingly carried across the ocean, that chance delivers the ultimate twist. He meets a young woman working there. She is a Swedish nurse in training named Marie. They strike up a conversation. They connect. When she returns to Sweden, they become dedicated pen pals. He eventually saves up and visits her in Scandinavia. They fall in love. They get married in December 1968. And this young man from British Guiana ends up living in Sweden for the next 50 years of his life.
The sheer statistical absurdity of it is staggering. A mosquito bite in South America leads to a hospital bed in London, which leads to a 50-year marriage in Stockholm. Once in Sweden, his resolve takes over again. He doesn't just coast, he works as a hospital porter, the exact same job he gave his fictional character, Amika. He grinds through evening classes. He eventually builds a highly respected career as a psychotherapist. He retires at 75, and instead of fading away, he sits down and starts writing books.
It is an unbelievably rich, multi-layered life. And to synthesize this journey, Taylor anchors his autobiography with 3 specific quotes from 3 very different thinkers. Let's break these down. First, he quotes the American novelist Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man. Ellison understood the crushing weight of societal invisibility.
Yes, and Taylor applies this directly to his own experience. As a young West Indian immigrant navigating the cold, racially hostile streets of 1960s London, Taylor understood invisibility viscerally. He was the other. He felt the exact same societal erasure that he later inflicted on his character, Amika.
The second quote is from V.S. Naipaul, the Nobel laureate, who wrote extensively about the concept of the multi-rooted man.
Which is a crucial distinction. Taylor realizes he isn't rootless, he isn't a man from nowhere, he's a man nourished by the soil of 3 distinct nations: the colonial warmth of Guyana, the harsh industrial reality of England, and the quiet, structured melancholy of Sweden. His identity isn't broken, it's plural.
And the final quote is from the esoteric philosopher P.D. Ouspensky, who observed that true self-knowledge always arrives slowly, usually uncomfortably, and almost always too late to be practically convenient. You figure out how to live your life right around the time you are preparing to leave it.
Which perfectly encapsulates the tragic comedy of the aging characters we discussed earlier. They are gaining wisdom just as their bodies and minds are failing them.
So looking at the sweep of Taylor's real life, from the linotype machine to the microfilaria to the Swedish winters, I have to ask you, the listener, what stands out to you? When you look in the mirror and trace the lines of your own history, how much of your current reality is just the blind roll of the dice, and how much is the result of your own iron resolve?
Taylor reaches a profound conclusion on this debate. He realizes that the dichotomy between chance and resolve is a false one. It is ultimately about how we meet the chance we are given. In the text, he writes, "The American dream of a teenage boy watching movies in Georgetown was a fine dream, but the life that replaced it was finer. Chance arranged it. I showed up."
Chance arranged it. I showed up. That gives me chills. And this autobiographical anchor completely and utterly recontextualizes the 17 stories that came before it.
It changes everything. Suddenly, you look back at the collection and you realize that Emika's paralyzing terror of the immigration office, Lamont's criminal failure in London, Cracker's devastating loneliness in the casino, Binky's desperate, unrequited love in Sweden, Perry's final performance before dementia, well, these aren't just clever, random fictions. They are fractured, funhouse reflections of Taylor's own multi-rooted journey.
They are the alternate timelines. They are the anxieties, the what-ifs, the darkest timelines of a man who spent decades sitting in a chair as a psychotherapist, absorbing and cataloging the quiet, everyday tragedies of human existence. He took the raw, unpolished materials of his own life, the biting cold of a 1960s London fog, the surreal glow of modern Swedish chat platforms, the fading golden memories of a Guyanese youth, and he fed them into his creative machinery.
He forged them, much like that old linotype machine, into a narrative structure that explores the single most universal human endeavor, the desperate, ongoing attempt to construct a meaning powerful enough to deny our own nothingness.
It is an absolute masterclass in storytelling. So let's recap our journey today. Lawrence G. Taylor's collection of 18 pieces brilliantly and unapologetically blurs the boundaries between flash fiction, poetry, and raw, unfiltered memoir. He has given us a visceral, uncompromising look at a life suspended between 3 nations. He has shown us characters who violently battle the absurdity of identity, who fall prey to the predatory mechanics of modern loneliness, who shatter against the unyielding rules of love, and who are ultimately forced to reckon with the terrifying, unceasing erosion of time.
And he accomplishes all of this with a profound, almost devastating sense of empathy, born not from academic theory, but from a life that has been truly, fully lived. Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with as we close the book today. We have spent this deep dive watching characters desperately, exhaustingly chasing illusions. We watch them bankrupt themselves for a digital scammer, invent fake wrestling investments, or try to force poetry upon a younger partner who just wanted to eat dinner. They were all trying to script their own realities. But Taylor himself, the architect of it all, finds his ultimate peace at age 84 by simply showing up to the unpredictable life that chance handed him via a microscopic parasite. It makes you wonder if we finally stopped fighting the current, if we stopped trying to rigidly script our own grand fantasies and just accepted the absurd, what kind of magnificent, unpredictable grace might we stumble into in our actual reality?
That is the perfect, terrifyingly beautiful question to leave hanging in the air. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you look into a mirror, we hope you remember the chaotic, fragile characters we met today. Keep questioning the reflection and keep exploring the realities hidden within your own fantasies. Until next time.